Alrighty, so here we are with the final commander deck to talk about from Outlaws at Thunder Junction. It is Grand Larceny. It is black, green, blue, and the theme says steal cards, generate mana. I have to say the commander actually looks really cool aesthetically, and obviously with this combination of colors there are tons of different directions this could go in. So let's jump into the video and take a look at the Outlaws of Thunder Junction Grand Larceny commander deck. Alright, thanks so much everybody for being here. I do appreciate y'all. As always, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet and you want to do so, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Feel free to click the bell if you want to get notified when new videos are posted. I'm trying to get in the flow of posting content very regularly, and there is tons of stuff to talk about, but I wanted to complete the series talking about the new cards in the commander decks before we move on to anything else. So yeah, stay tuned here, and with that being said, we're going to jump right into this, and we've talked about all three of the other ones. You can definitely check those out on the channel if you haven't seen them yet. This one has a face commander known as Ganty, Cany Acquisitor. It is 2 black, green, blue legendary creature Aetherborn Rogue. It says spells you cast but don't own cost 1 less to cast. I immediately think of like Ragavan here with his ability to like cast your opponent's stuff, but of course, you know, in this case, he's not going to fit into that color scheme. Whenever one or more creatures you control deal combat damage to a player, look at the top card of that player's library, then exile it face down. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. This is really, really cool, and by far my favorite commander, just concept-wise, out of all 4 of these decks, because it's super unique in the sense that, like, you're exiling those cards face down, you're keeping basically, like, a reserve of your opponent's things that you can access and they cannot, and being able to cast mana of any color at a reduced cost opens up a ton of different possibilities for where you can take this deck. And while I briefly looked over some of these cards, I try to, you know, save my reactions for, like, going through and actually reading them, kind of giving you, like, my takes as best I can. So I'm thinking that a lot of the other cards in here are going to combo well with this, or maybe play into giving you benefits if you cast other stuff. I think this card, though, is really, really cool. It is by far my favorite of the, you know, options that we have here, and I think it's just a really, really neat concept for a commander that is going to, ideally, I think, have a lot of interest from people. So I like this one a lot. It's my favorite of the 8 face commander cards that, you know, we're going to have access to here. But that's not to say Felix 5 Boots isn't good either. It is 2 black, green, blue legendary creature Ooze Rogue. It has Menace and Ward 2, and says if a creature you control dealing combat damage to a player causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So you've had Panharmonicon, you've had Ishin, and now you have one that triggers off of dealing combat damage, and honestly, it's really good in its own right. Not only does it actually combo well with your commander, which is certainly something you always like to see, but it will combo well with a lot of other things, and probably could even work as its own commander, because there are just, you know, ways to build around this with tons of things that deal combat damage and give you extra triggers. And with Menace and Ward 2, it's a pretty beefy thing to try to get over. I think it's funny that it's an Ooze. I mean, there's obviously plenty of Ooze cards that are quite good. I just think from a concept perspective, it's funny that this is an Ooze Rogue. The picture is very unique on this guy. And I do like him. I think he's very much different from the, you know, the main commander there, or the alternate special commander, whatever it is. But it doesn't mean I don't think he's good. I actually think he's quite good, and I think he is going to be one that will probably be quite popular among players, because there are a lot of people who really like those duplication effects, and he is just another option to kind of build around there that also gives you access to some good colors. Let me know what you guys think between these two, which one you think is better. I definitely think Ganty is a little bit stronger and certainly more interesting from a play perspective, but there's no denying that Felix 5 Boots has a goofy name, some goofy art, and a fantastic effect, so I think there's going to be some interest in both. Now, Arcane Heist is a 2 blue-blue sorcery. You may cast target instant or sorcery card from an opponent's graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell will be put into their graveyard, exile it instead. It also has Cipher. It says you may exile the spell card encoded on a creature you control. Whenever that creature deals combat damage to a player, its controller may cast a copy of the encoded card without paying its mana cost. I'll be honest, I've only been into Magic for the past, say, 4 to 5 years, give or take, so I'm not super familiar with every keyword, especially older ones. I don't know if Cipher is new or if it exists already, but the concept here is pretty simple, and there's a lot of other cards like Imprint that do pretty similar things. So basically, you're exiling it, you're choosing a creature, and then when that creature deals damage, you can, you know, cast the copy of the encoded card. Basically, you're able to use Arcane Heist on future turns, and not to mention, actually, because it triggers off of, you know, dealing combat damage, I'd like to think that Felix 5 Boots will actually trigger that ability to happen multiple times. So if you're playing an opponent who has a lot of instant sorceries in their graveyard, you can really make some strong use out of this card as a whole. Of course, it is dependent on the opponent, so there is that element that's going to sort of hinder it a bit in terms of being like applicable in every situation, but there are certainly going to be times where this card will come in handy. Smirking Spelljacker is 4-blue, Djinn Wizard Rogue with Flash and Flying, and when it enters the battlefield, exile target spell an opponent controls. Whenever it attacks, if a card is exiled with it, you may cast the exile card without paying its mana cost. So this is like Hullbreaker Horror, or what is it, Spirit Queller? I can't remember the name exactly, but you know, you're basically countering it on the stack before it even resolves, which is not bad. I mean, it does cost 5 mana, so there is that. You know, it's not going to be super good early game necessarily, but you can not only exile an opponent's spell, you can then play that exiled spell, meaning that you can choose the best time to kind of counter this and then have access to that powerful spell for yourself, you know, without having to worry about any of the mana costs. It's a cool card. It's a little costly, but it's definitely one to keep in mind. And just in general, like having access to being able to get rid of a spell before it, you know, resolves and does damage to you while it's on the stack, that can be pretty good in its own right in a lot of different decks. Heartless Conscription is 6 black sorcery. This is exile all creatures. For each card exiled this way, you may play that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any color can be spent to cast that spell. Exile Heartless Conscription. So it's a board wipe that costs 8, but you can get access to everything that gets exiled as a result. That means bringing back your own cards as well as your opponent's cards, and of course with your commander, you can reduce the cost of those that you're going to play. So in addition to being able to use any kind of mana, you could also play them for less. It's a really strong card that my only worry is the cost, but it's also really powerful. I mean, it's an exiling board wipe, and if you're playing this in a pot of 4, you have a massive pool, you know, in the right circumstances of cards to recast, and obviously your opponents can't cast them from exile unless it's something specific that allows them to do so. So you have, you know, if you time this right and you play this at the right moment, you have a lot of application with it. The cost does concern me a little bit, and it's a sorcery, so it's going to be a little slower. But it's a good card, and it does feel like something that's at least going to be worth kind of trying out, because if you can reduce the cost or you play this later in a game, you can definitely do a lot of damage with it. Orochi Soul Reaver is 5 and a black creature, Snake Ninja Rogue with Ninjutsu 3 and a black. Whenever one or more creatures controls deal combat damage to a player, create a treasure token and manifest the top card of that player's library. Manifest, if you don't remember, is put it onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature, then turn it face up anytime for its mana cost if it is a creature card. So again, this card combos extremely well with your face commander here, because you can basically cast those cards for less because you do not own them. Additionally, it combos with Felix 5 boots quite well too, because you can take 2 cards to get 2 treasure tokens, and obviously the manifesting at the worst is still giving you like 2/2 chump blockers or tokens on the field, and with ninjutsu, like, this is probably going to get through most times, so there's kind of a lot to like about it in terms of the advantage that it can give you. And of course, if you get lucky and happen to hit a strong creature off your opponent's field, you can then turn it, you know, turn it over and use it against the opponent. So overall, I do like this one a lot. I think it's pretty good, and I think just generally speaking, even outside of this specific deck, it has a lot of application. Rogues, of course, have a whole theme of, you know, being unblockable, being able to get through, and you can definitely find ways to make that work outside of the precon, in my opinion. Thieving Varmint is 1 and a black creature, Varmint with Death Touch and Lifelink. You can tap and pay 1 life, add 2 mana of any one color, spend this mana only to cast spells you don't own. I think this one probably gets my pick for the best card in the precon for new cards. It is really strong for only 2 mana. At worst, you have a Death Touch, Lifelink, you know, 2-drop that's just solid enough on its own. But being able to essentially pay life to get 2 mana is going to make it really strong with your commanders here, because you're going to be able to have access to a ton of opponents' cards to cast, and you can cast them for, you know, a reduced cost by 1, and then you get 2 mana out of this for 1 life. So on future turns, you know, you're really starting to get these cards that your opponent controls for a very low cost, as long as you've been able to build up a bit of mana. It does a lot for a low cost, and having a dork that can then, you know, add for 2 instead of just 1 at the cost of 1 life, which in Commander not only doesn't matter too much, but also it does have lifelink, so in certain circumstances, if you're swinging with it, you can gain that life back. You know, obviously not the most practical application, but I'm just pointing out all facets of the card's capabilities, and I think this is just a really good card, you know, in general. Savvy Trader is 3 and a green creature human citizen. When it enters the battlefield, exile target permanent card from your graveyard. You may play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 1 less to cast. First, right off the bat, this works really well with, like, casting stuff from the grave, casting stuff with, like, Foretell, from exile. You can obviously reduce the costs there. But again, and I've said this a few times, it synergizes really well with Ganty because you can reduce the cost of things you don't own by 2. So if you're casting your opponent's cards from exile, they're already going to cost 2 less, and that's not factoring in anything else that might reduce those costs. Plus, exiling a permanent from your graveyard and then being able to play it at any point, I mean, it's sort of like a... It's not a reanimate, but it's sort of like a cheaper way to get things out, or if something gets popped and you want to exile it and then recast it later, heck, you could probably even get around command tax that way and play your commander for a lower cost, because, if it's exiled with this, you'll be able to play it that way. Just overall, a really good utility card, I think, that does a lot, and it's not just going to work in here. I mean, any deck that, if you're reliant on casting stuff from grave, like maybe Muldrotha, or things of that nature, you're going to be able to make use of this card's abilities. We've got Tower Winder. It's 1 and a green creature snake with reach and death touch. When it enters the battlefield, search your library and or graveyard for a card named Command Tower, reveal it, and put it into your hand. As a Yu-Gi-Oh player previously, it is very funny to see cards that search specific. Yu-Gi-Oh is very big on that. Obviously, searching for cards is a big, part of the way that game plays. And so it's interesting to see that translate over to Magic, specifically because there has not been a card that searches a named land ever prior to this. There are a few that search like specifically named creatures or cards, but nothing with lands. And generically speaking, I mean, I don't know why you wouldn't play this card. It's it's as long as you have access to the color, of course. At worst, it can block flyers and has death touch, and at best, it's giving you access to Command Tower, thinning the deck, guaranteeing you something that will give you access to any colors your deck wants to get to. It is just overall a really, really strong card in every facet, and will probably be a staple in Commander in anything that can play green. There's really not much else to say beyond that. It's just a really, really good card. And I've read online, I know some people are concerned that, like, they might start going in that direction of more specific stuff. I mean, I would say let's, hold off before we get panicked about that. We're seeing one card that does this, and it's more generic in the sense that, like, every Commander deck plays Command Tower for the most part. So I think it's okay to just maybe take a breath and just say, hey, this is a pretty good card. It doesn't necessarily mean, Doom is going to forsake the game with all these, Yu-Gi-Oh-like mechanics and stuff. Just a really good card in general, though, and I think I did mention, Thieving Varmint, really good. This is probably the best generic card across the board, because if you're playing green, you're probably going to want to play this. So, I mean, it's just, that's really all there is to say. And finally, we've got Dream Thief's Bandana. This is a 2-drop colorless artifact equipment. Whenever a equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, look at the top card of their library and exile it face down. For as long as it remains exiled, you may play it, and mana of any type can be spent to cast that spell. So again, basically turns your creature into a Ragavan, although of course it doesn't give you the treasure. But with the other cards we've seen here that reduce the costs of spells you're casting that you don't own, and just, I guess, being able to, like, get certain, slimming cards off the top of the opponent's deck, you could hit something good that's part of their strategy, and now it's face down and they don't have a way to use it. So there's plenty of reasons to like it. Not to mention it's an equip cost of 1, so it's really not that big of an investment. You get this out early, and you can start kind of poking and getting access to things. It also does note that you can play it, not cast it, meaning that you can technically play a land if you exile an opponent's land, because it doesn't say you may cast it. Just a little added bonus, I guess, on the chance that you do hit a land with it. So that is going to do it for this video. As far as the reprints, again, nothing super noteworthy, which is a little disappointing this go around. I think, a couple of the decks had some decent ones, but it's maybe we were spoiled after, like, Murders of Karlov Manor and Lost Caverns of Ixalan had some big money reprints. I think the decks as a whole are pretty cool, though, and they do have some really good cards, so it'll be interesting to see what type of impact they have on the metagame. Let me know what you guys think over all of these decks. Out of the 4, is there one that you gravitate towards more than others? You'd be getting any? And, yeah, thanks so much for watching. I'll check you in the next video.